Good evening, comic creators. Welcome to the Comics Experience presentation of Breaking into Comics. I'm going to start off with a few ground rules so that we get everybody on the same page, and then I'll turn it over to Andy so that he can start the presentation. We'd like to actually have everybody mute their microphones so that Andy is the only one who's talking. We're going to take all the questions in the chat. So if anybody has any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat at any time. And as soon as we get to the end of the presentation, we will take as many questions as possible. If you'd like to keep your camera on, that would be fantastic. We don't mind that at all. Just if you put your microphones on mute, that would be perfect. So we've got quite a large group here. I think we fully sold out all of our free tickets, which is usually good because when something is free, it's easy to sell it out. So right now, I'm going to turn things over to Andy and let him start the show. Andy, where'd you go?
I'm right here. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now. It's perfect.
Yeah. What's a presentation without technical difficulties?
Exactly.
Thanks. And just, I don't think you said this, Gamal, but just so everybody here knows, this is being recorded. So if you're okay with that, great. If not, then that stinks. But it's going to be posted on our YouTube channel, right? But we will cut out the Q&A at the end, so don't worry about your question, people knowing what you were asking questions about or whatever. Sound good, Gamal?
Yeah, that's perfect. We can do it that way.
Okay. All right. So thanks everybody for coming. We really appreciate the enthusiasm and you spending your Monday evening with us, assuming you're in an evening time. So let's just dive in and we'll get to it. So before we get started, just so everybody knows what Comics Experience is, Gamal and I work at Comics Experience, run Comics Experience really, and we specialize in several different things, but a lot of them are courses for comic book creators and comic book publishers and business types as well. So we blend the two. Courses are dedicated on specific topics, and then we also do a community pro or community and community pro that we have, which is online on a Discord. There are other aspects to it too. We do live monthly happy hours. We got one on Wednesday. We do peer critiques. We do lessons, about a lesson a month that are live and interactive. We do weekly Q&As. We have professional guests that show up. We hold office hours. So you can have some one-on-one time with us if you're working on a specific project, or in Gamal's case, you've got business or legal questions. And we're just active, and we do everything from just kind of celebrating pop culture and all that stuff going on around us to digging into topics for comics creators and fans. So that's a bit about what Comics Experience does. You can learn more about that at comicsexperience.com. CEX Publishing is a publishing company that I run. We focus on creator-owned comics because we like creators. And you can check us out at cexcomics.com or cexpublishing.com, either one. All right, so with that out of the way, let's get into breaking into comics, creating your own career. First of all, your panelists, Mr. Gamal Hennessy. Gamal, do you want to introduce yourself for a sec? Or at least your background?
Sure. I am a author, attorney, and business consultant who specializes in the comic book industry. I've been in the industry since the late 1900s. I have worked for Japanese animation companies. I've worked for Marvel. I have worked for individual writers and authors, helping them both on the legal side and develop their business programs for their comic books going forward. Like I said, I work with very small creators and very large organizations like Mad Cave Studios and Viacom and Amazon and everything in between. So, in terms of comics experience, a lot of what I do is help people on the business and legal side help figure out how to protect their intellectual property, how to negotiate their contracts, how to actually build their business plan. And that is about it.
Or as I call it, boring.
True. You're not
So
wrong.
boring.
You're not wrong.
uh, we like having, like I said, the two sides of things. So Gamal really focuses on business, and then I focus on more of the creative side of things. And look, I added special effects to my photo, and his was still cooler than mine. So I'm Andy Schmidt. I run Comics Experience with Gamal. I also run a comics and graphic novel and art book printing company called ONS Printing, and I'm the publisher at CEX Publishing. I started in comics in 2002, really, when I was an assistant. Got hired as an assistant editor at Marvel, where I worked for a number of years, left Marvel, started Comics Experience, went back full-time as an editor at IDW, where I launched G.I. Joe, and I took over Transformers and Star Trek and Dungeons and Dragons, all kinds of fun stuff. I worked at Hasbro in their intellectual property department, where I was in charge of often taking older toys and brands that they had and then developing them for how they could come back out and in today's market, well, in 2012's market. And then when I left there in 2013, I went on my own, and I've been freelance writing. I do comics, video games, prose stories, screenplays, animation. I do all of that stuff, and I consult in the entertainment industry and in the publishing industry as well. But yeah, that's what we do. We try to vary our experience. I know both of us do that. But let's dig into the topic. First thing I want to do is talk about what breaking into comics means, because it's a term that's thrown around, or a question thrown around a lot. And there is always sort of this, seems an underlying assumption of what breaking in means, that we all have our idea of what it means, but it's different from person to person. So, you know, when I was younger, breaking into comics meant I was working at Marvel or DC, because I grew up a superhero fan. Since then, my horizons have branched out, and I realized there's way more to comics and being a part of comics than just, you know, just one genre. And now I love all kinds of stuff in comics. But we boil it down, breaking into comics, at least for the sake of this discussion. If you want to have a different definition for yourself, that's fine. But for this discussion, it really means if you are making comics and you're putting them out for consumption by people that aren't you or your direct relatives, then you're in, right? Because it is the act of making and then sharing that reading experience with people outside of your friend group, that's what breaking in is. And then as long as you continue to do that, then you are a part of the business. You may be a small part, you might wind up becoming a huge part. And we can talk a little bit about going from putting out your first thing, which likely won't be a huge hit. It's rare that that's the case, but sometimes it will, sometimes it can, to how you grow your career. We'll probably wind up talking a little bit about that as well as we go ahead. And I appreciate somebody giving us the "oh yeah" in the chat for the Kool-Aid man. All right, so one key aspect about breaking into comics, because breaking into comics mean making them, it can be being paid to make them, right, or draw them, or paid to do all of it, right, draw, letter, color, all of it. It can mean publishing them. It can mean doing that all on your own for no pay, and then you put it together and you put it out. Or it can be a collaborative effort, creator owned, which is when the creators own it and they're not typically, they can be compensated at some point, but or work for hire, which is where you get hired and the company owns the work that you do for them. Either way, across, there's this wide spectrum of ways that you can be making comics. So if breaking in, we've really broadened that definition of what breaking into comics is, because there's so many ways to interact with comics. The thing to do to narrow it down for yourself is to know your goals in comics. So knowing, hey, I want to be a famous comic book writer, which is sort of a contradiction in terms, let's just say a famous comic book writer or a famous comic book artist, then you're going to be looking for projects that are going to have a wider and wider reach, right? Or if you know that there's a specific genre or a specific audience you want to go for, then you're going to focus your effort on achieving that goal, not drawing X-Men all day long. Right. And if your goals are monetary based, are they fan interaction based? Are you somebody that really wants to spend all of your weekends at conventions, hand selling your own stuff, getting to know your fans and building your comics career that way? Knowing what you want to do, what your end game is, so to speak, is really, really important, because you can lock yourself in this idea of what achieving something in comics is, even if that thing isn't what you actually want to do. So you want to set your goals so that you can also set your own benchmarks, and you can sort of measure your own personal success. And that is success that you're not measuring by any sort of outside force. You're not measuring it by sales data. You're not measuring it by, how well your friends are doing in the industry or any of that sort of thing. Because once you start doing the comparing game, the whole rule about the grass being greener on the other side of the fence really kicks in, and you will drive yourself absolutely crazy, and you will likely get very depressed because you just don't see what you're accomplishing. Whereas if you focus on your goals and what you're doing to achieve those goals, you're much more likely to experience success, and you're much more likely to, feel that success as you're going along. Okay. So those are really important before we start digging in. So the 3 fundamentals to breaking into comics. You've probably heard some variation on this type of thing before, but we're going to go through them. The first is talent. Being able to write or draw well is helpful, for sure. But what we look at as talent, the sort of the conventional wisdom is that people are either born with talent or they are born without a talent for a certain thing. I don't see it that way. What I see talent as being the measure of is, if I have an idea for a drawing in my head, or I have an idea for a story or a character in my head, can I get it? Can I start to get it out? That's where talent begins. It's all up here. It's in your head. Can you see? Do you have a vision for what you're doing? If you have no vision, there's not much to work with. But almost everybody I encounter that's interested in breaking into comics, if I ask, by a show of hands, people go, yeah, I've got ideas for stories, or I know what I want to draw. I know what it's supposed to look like. It doesn't mean that you can draw what's in your head so that what you draw looks like what's in your head, or that the story comes out exactly the way you think it should in your head. That's something different. Talent is just having the vision for the thing. Right? Having the vision for the story or the art or the color palette or what have you, right? To the point where you can likely talk about it. So most of us, probably if you are here in this room, you signed up for this, then you've got this covered. The second key ingredient is persistence. This is where talent, where that vision starts to meet action, starts to meet execution. So if you've got the idea or the vision, what the persistence does is, through learning, through analysis, through exercises, through working on these things, right? You start to get better at translating the vision in your head to the page in the comic book or graphic novel, right? So most artists, when they're 5 years old and they draw things, it doesn't look like a photograph, right? It does not look exactly like what they think it looks like. In fact, there are developmental things with art specifically, like, that are really fascinating. If you start to look into how art progresses for children, like children of a certain age, when they draw a person, their arms come out like halfway up their body. Like, that's a specific developmental thing. And then later, those arms are just naturally going to shift and attach at shoulders. So there's a lot of these things that, as we go along, no artist is born perfect, with perfect drawing skills or coloring skills or inking skills or what have you. And so that's where the practice and the working at it, and whether it's courses and classes or it's reading books or it's a combination of all of this stuff, if it's lived experience, all of us are influenced by the lives that we have and by the people that we meet and the experiences we have. We're going to the persistence and sticking with it is massively important towards achieving the ability to get that vision in your brain translated to paper. It's also very important in terms of how you conduct trying to get jobs if you're going for work for hire, or get in touch with people for a creator-owned book. Like if you're trying to get a contract for, I've got this book, I've been working my butt off for it, now I want to get it out to the world, and I want to do that with a publisher. Persistence comes into play with that, and we'll talk about sort of networking and how persistence plays there as well. But if you've got that vision and you've got persistence, you've got the ability to work on it, even if you can't work on it hours and hours on end every day, doesn't matter. You might be able to work on it 20 minutes, 5 days a week, or maybe it's an hour, 3 or 4 days a week, or whatever it is. Just the persistence and the doing it, that's what's going to get you closer and closer to achieving it. The third thing is luck. And luck sounds like you have no control over it. But the truth is that when you have the talent and the persistence, the luck should really take care of itself, because the luck is being in the right person's brain at the right time. It's where preparation, meets opportunity. It's the other way people will talk about it. And so if you've been persistent about getting better and getting better, and if you've been persistent about reaching out to your contacts or creating new contacts within the industry, the luck will take care of itself, because eventually you're going to submit a pitch and it'll be fresh in somebody's mind when their publisher goes, hey, editorial, we've got room for 1 or 2 books and we're thinking this genre or this genre, and they go, hey, I've got just the thing, I was talking to this guy a month ago, or this person a month ago, right? So that's how luck kind of works. So the reality in terms of getting your first work out there, getting your first gig, your first contract, or your first job offer to work on things, really comes down to these 3, granted, fairly broad topics. But if you've got the talent, if you've got the vision, if you've got the persistence, as I was saying, the luck will pretty much take care of itself. So you've got those first 2, the third one, you should be doing fine, right? You should get that chance. If you're talented and you're lucky, but not super persistent, I don't think you can do this without any of the 3. But if persistence is your weak point, but you're really lucky and you're talented, then again, you should get a shot or 2 at having a project. And then, of course, if you're a talentless hack, but you're really persistent about doing this, and you're lucky, again, it works out. So any 2 of them will do, but having all 3 should accelerate the process for you. So the goal is to be talented and persistent and lucky, and hopefully those things will take care of themselves and give you your opportunity, whether that's a contract to do your own creator-owned book, you've got a successfully funded crowdfunding campaign, you've got your webcomic picked up, or you've got a job offer from somebody that's going to pay you to do the thing you want to do. And those are your 3 key ingredients to breaking in. And by breaking in, I really mean getting that first opportunity to get your book out there. But one of the key things about comics today is that you don't need somebody else's permission. And I wasn't necessarily going to get into this in this presentation, but it's worth at least touching on, because of your ability to do digital printing, which is usually a low print run, your ability to print online with crowdfunding. There are all of these ways for you to get your comic book out into the world without having to ask somebody else for permission. Even as short a time ago, and which granted is getting now into the multiples of decades, when I was breaking in, that wasn't really the case. We didn't have crowdfunding. Digital comics weren't really doing a whole lot. We were there were online comics that was emerging. But if you wanted to work in the industry, you pretty much, and you wanted to get your comic book out somewhere, pretty much had to have a contract with a publisher, which meant somebody at that publisher had to say, I want to go through the hassle of getting a contract together with you because I believe in you and your project, right? Or the same thing with getting hired, right? Yeah, Marvel or DC or Dark Horse or somebody had to hire me to write a thing, and then I'd get it out into the world. But that's much less true now. Now, it is a make your own destiny sort of thing, and nobody is there to tell you no. I mean, there are people that will tell you no, because Some people like to tell other people no, but you don't have to listen to them because you do have other avenues other than a traditional publishing model to get your work out, which is really awesome and amazing. All right, so let's talk about the 3 fundamentals to staying in comics, which means kind of furthering your career. If you're doing work for hire work, you've gotten a gig, or 2, how are you going to go about, what does it take to continue to get more and more work? And they're a little bit different. But the first one's the same. We still need that vision, still need that talent. And here I've swapped out, instead of persistence, which is still very helpful, it's professionalism. Professionalism, once you started building your network, hopefully your network of people that you know will continue to sort of naturally expand, either by people that you work with, you get introduced to people at conventions or online or wherever, or through a crowdfunding platform that has these social aspects, or through a comics experience community, whatever it is. Your world within comics will continue to expand, especially after you've had you put out a thing or 2. But professionalism is different. Professionalism is how you are presenting yourself. It's your attitude. It's the way you conduct yourself in public forums, like social media is a big one, and how you conduct yourself with the people you're making your art with, or you're doing business with. And so it's really important to give thought to this, because this is going to become more important as you go along. But it's hugely important, because if you're not professional, if you're somebody that is quick to anger and belittles the people you work with, or you can never hit a deadline, or you'll never spare a time, you never say thanks for anything, you never help other people out, all that kind of stuff that goes with being professional. If you don't do that stuff, or you do it really poor, actually doing it poorly, can really affect. It's a small community, even though there are all these different ways to be a part of it, it's still a small community, and every part blends over into the other parts at least a little. So even if you're over in one corner of the industry, if you're doing if you're a bad actor, so to speak, that is going to bleed over into other parts too, and it can cause real problems. So by example, what I do is I created years ago, I created a social media profile for myself, and there were things that I would and wouldn't do on social public media. So you won't find me swearing on any of the social media that I used to do. I recently came off social media, and my life is wonderful now. But I don't do that even within our own comics community. And I don't. I can be honest with somebody about feedback. I can have criticism, but I can do so in a way that hopefully I try very hard to make sure that it can also be uplifting at the same time. Being honest about it is important, right? Because you have to be able to take criticism. I have to be able to give criticism in a way that hopefully says there's another way to do this. Let's take a look at it, and it hopefully is helpful to you and uplifts you, or what have you. So deciding who you want to be professionally. Other people make different decisions, and it doesn't mean they're inherently wrong. I kind of went the safest, most risk-free way, and honestly, it fits my personality because I like being nice to people. But other people, online, they're somebody else completely. They're rabble rousers, and they're all this sort of stuff, and that is something that they cultivate too, and it can be useful, right? I mean, it can get a lot of attention, right? So being aware of what type of professional and how you want to present yourself is really super important once you get your career going. So it's worth giving some thought to it before the career starts to take off. The last one, the third one, is being nice, which is really, it really just boils down to that. Like, be nice to people, right? Treat them with mutual respect. So, just try to, just try to let people know that you're a human too, and whatever it is that they're going through, not that you necessarily can relate to everything exactly, but that, you've got some empathy in you. And the key here is that the same holds true. If you're talented and you're professional, then as long as you're not a jerk, like, you'll do fine, right? People still want to work with you because you're easy to work with, and you turn things in on time, and you've got a professional attitude towards things, and the work is good. or you can be talented and you can be really nice, and then I don't mind if you slide on a deadline here or there, right? Like if I'm your editor, right? There are things that, if you if you lack some of the professional qualities, I got to clean up your grammar a little more than I'd like to, but you're really super nice, then I don't mind doing it, right? I don't feel bad, and I want to keep working with you because I enjoy you. And of course, if you're a talentless hack, which is my favorite variation on this, but you're professional and you get your stuff done on time, and you constantly, you can hit a single every time I give you a project, maybe a double, and you're super nice, you're easy to work with, and you're super nice, then sure, then I'm still going to want to work with you, even though I'm pretty confident that no project we do together is going to blow the doors off and change the industry. Ideally, again, all three is the way to go, right? And it's an evolving process. So if you're talented and professional and nice, and you're persistent, and you're a bit lucky, then your career really starts to blossom and grow, because you should always be pushing yourself to do something more, to do the next thing, and to add a new ingredient to it, to challenge yourself in new ways, to challenge your readers too. So a lot of people that talk about, I want to try new stuff for myself and challenge myself, which is great, and I encourage you to do that, but also challenging your readers and interacting with your readers, at least getting some level of feedback, so that when you try something really experimental, a lot of us have a tendency to be like, I did this giant experiment on the page and then I put it out, so it must have worked. Except that printing and distributing a book doesn't mean that the thing worked. Actually getting feedback like, hey, what did you think was going on in this sequence where, the panels went in circles, or time had no meaning, and some of the panels were in black and white, and some were in color, and some were in sepia tone, and some were in blah, blah, like finding out when you experiment on things like that, finding out, getting that feedback that it actually works. And if people are like, oh, that wasn't exactly what I got, doesn't mean it was a total flop. It just means they got something else out of it. As long as it didn't drastically negatively impact their reading experience, find out what they did get out of it, because that might be a tool you can use, and then explain like, oh, this is what I was really hoping this would do. And then you might be able to find out how you can improve the thing that you tried, maybe make a few tweaks so that it becomes even more clear the next time you try it. That's the overview on breaking in, staying in, and a little bit developing. Obviously we're talking in broad strokes here, because I don't know if I'm assuming we have writers and artists and business people in here, so I'm not drilling down too specifically. We can get into some of that in the Q&A. We have a couple other slides where I'm going to let Gamal take over. So Gamal, you can take over from here.
Sounds good. What I'd like to do in these next few slides is look at what you need to do to actually advance your career once you've actually got your initial foot in the door, once you're in a space where you have your first book out, or you've worked on a project, or you're actually in a stage where you're actually ready to take that next step. The first thing that you need to do is actually leverage the project that you were on and the relationship that you made in that project to get you other work. Now, this doesn't make a difference whether you're working freelance or creator-owned or as an independent comic creator, because in Western comics, the comic book process is almost always a group effort. You'll have a writer, an artist, maybe an inker, a letterer, a colorist, an editor, a publisher. Those people are all working on one finite project, and they're all going to move to another project at a certain point. When everybody moves, your network expands. The comic book industry is fairly small because a lot of people cross-pollinate with a lot of other people when they move from this publisher to that publisher, or from this project to that project. And as they're moving, opportunities are actually opening up for everyone if everyone actually stays involved in the networking process. A lot of what I see is people network really hard to get that first deal, to get that first project, and then they get a project and then they stop networking and they wonder why they don't get any more projects. The key is, even as your first project is going on, it always makes sense to pay attention to what's going on in the industry, who's moving from place to place, who do you know that's, working on different things. and how that is actually going to impact what you're doing. The key component to networking is figuring out what you can do for other people, because that kind of energy circles back. So if you're working on a project and another project comes in and you can't work on it, the key networking thing there to do is to know someone else who's going to be able to do that project. That's going to help the person getting the project. It's going to help the person that needs the project. And both of them are going to see you in a better light. So when another opportunity comes up, you will get that other opportunity. And that's something that you have to continue doing all throughout your career. There is a reason a lot of us put a lot of money and effort and time and health concerns into going to places like San Diego or New York Comic Con or things like that. Because comic books is a very geographically isolated process, you're kind of working by yourself alone. You kind of feel like you're not networking, but between social media and going to things like the cons and meeting people in things like the Comics Experience Discord, you can actually maintain that network so you actually have a much tighter understanding of where you fit in and what's going on as you move through your career. Andy, could you hit the next slide? The idea about scaling is that, and we talk about this a lot in Comics Experience, the first project that you do is not going to be Watchmen, okay? It shouldn't be Watchmen. If the first thing you try to do is going to be Watchmen, it will probably explode in your face. Not because you can't do it, but because you probably shouldn't do it right now. The way that I always hear Andy explain it is, when you're starting with a comic, start with a 3-page comic. And if you can do a 3-page comic, then move on to 10 pages, then move on to a single issue, then move on to maybe a limited series. It doesn't have to be the same story. It can be different stories and different genres, different projects, but build up your capabilities in both the business side and the creative side, so that you're not just dumping all of your energy, all of your money, all of your time into one project. When I started teaching people about business building business careers in the comic book industry, I referred to the danger room. For all of you who have never read an issue of X-Men before, the danger room is where they put the characters into situations that mimicked being dangerous, but were not dangerous, so that if and when they failed, they learned from that experience and can then apply that to when a real situation came up. This is the same kind of idea. Start with a small project, build to a larger project, and then as your skills and your capability and your network grow, the projects that you do grow, so that, sooner or later, you're like James Tinian and you've got your own company and there's books coming out left and right all over the place. Next slide, please. Leverage is the idea that as your talent and your network and your reputation in the industry grows, what you can ask for at any given point will also grow. So for example, if you're like a freelance creator and you start out and you get a certain page rate for what you're doing in your work, at your 10th project, you shouldn't necessarily be making the same page rate. If you're professional, you have talent, you're good to work with, people are calling you, you're more in demand, the price goes up. And there's no point in keeping the same price if you can actually command a larger price. The same thing goes for a creator-owned deal. Your first creator-owned deal may not be the greatest thing in the world. Your third or fourth creator-owned deal can have a film option. You can have the merchandising rights. You can have a lot of the things that you ask for because you're a proven commodity in the industry. If you're doing crowdfunding, your first crowdfunding campaign, you may not be shooting for a huge number for your goal. Your 15th, your 20th, we have people who are in Comics Experience in our pro program who their entire publishing program is based on crowdfunding, and they're making 6 figures every time they do a crowdfunding campaign. They didn't do that the first time they did a crowdfunding campaign. They leveraged their reputation, they leveraged their capabilities, so that as they grew, what they could ask for and what they actually get grows as well. Next slide. Oh, I ran out of slides. Okay, I have nothing else to say.
Yeah, you're all done. Just to wrap up, what we're talking about here is something I hit on earlier, which is you can own your own career by setting your own goals and understanding that just being a part of the industry means creating comics, or if you have a role like editor or a publisher or even a printer, you're helping people create comics and get them out into the world. As long as you're a voice within the community, you've broken in, you're breaking in. And then the rest of what we sort of talked about was, don't take no for an answer just because one publisher says no. There's 1,000 different reasons that they say no, and most of them don't have anything to do with you or the quality of your project. Own your own career, right? And whether that means take it to crowdfunding like Gamal was just talking about, or what have you. But that's really, hopefully we have a message of empowerment and so a few key takeaways so that you can set up the parameters of how you approach comics and how you approach potentially your career or your hobby as a comics creator. There's no one way to do this, and there's no one right way to do this. So setting your own goals, setting your own boundaries, and being the controller of your own destiny is really the big key, and it is possible to do today in ways that it wasn't even as early as 20 years ago. And from here, I'll just reiterate again, thank you for coming through the Comics Experience Breaking into Comics panel, and please check us out online